keep debating if I want my blanket or not. It feels weird to sit on the couch without my blanket, but it's actually really hot. I have the heat off, the radiator's off, but even with it off, it just emanates so much heat. So I'm actually sweating here. So I don't need the blanket, but it's cozy. I got my plants here today. I guess we're ready. Anyway, let's dive in. Welcome to my little podcast, the Reel Thesis Podcast. I am so happy to have you here today. My name is Shalini, and I'm a screenwriter, I'm a budding filmmaker, I'm a lawyer, and I think most relevantly, I'm an English nerd. I have loved analyzing stories since I was a teenager. And when I was in high school, I used to go watch films on the weekends with my friends, and then we would just sit in the car and talk about and analyze the film for an hour or more after. And I really miss that. I don't get to do that with a lot of people. So I decided to create this podcast so I can basically share my love of films, study films as a filmmaker, but then also just get to share the insights and the ways that filmmakers tell stories on screen. Today, we are going to be talking about the film A Promising Young Woman. Despite the fact that it has a very girly pop vibe, it does touch on very serious topics like sexual assault, rape. It does touch on suicide. So if any of these are sensitive topics for you, skip this episode and tune into another one. I also really want to shout out my French teacher, Camille. I take lessons on this app called Preply, and Camille is just a really amazing teacher. She does this great job of giving me articles to read or videos to watch that discuss relevant topics in French culture today. And we've been really discussing topics such as violence contre les femmes, violence against women, mariage forcé, forced marriage, and just all these topics in France, but also in French territories. And because we had been discussing it for a few weeks, this topic had kind of been on my mind, and I think that's why I chose to do A Promising Young Woman. So big shout out to Camille, because this has just been a really great way to put all these thoughts together and incorporate into my work. Okay, let's talk about the film. A Promising Young Woman came out in 2020, and it is directed by Emerald Fennell. Emerald Fennell has been in the news a lot lately because Wuthering Heights just came out last week. I am not going to be covering that film. It makes me very sad because Wuthering Heights is one of my favorite books, and I love Charlie XCX, and this film is made for someone like me, but I really have disagreed with some of the stuff that Emerald Fennell has said regarding the film, especially around her casting of Heathcliff. That just really upset me. And also, I just don't feel like she did an interpretation with anything to say. It just felt very vapid and style over substance. So I'm not going to cover the film. She also did Saltburn, which everybody raved about, but I sort of felt like the film wasn't written well. It felt like it was great style and it had great shock factor to it. But beyond that, I was the story isn't very a solid story to me. So I'm saying this because I don't endorse all of Emerald Fennell's work. I'm just kind of sticking to the parameters of this film. And I definitely do not endorse the things she says or does, in total. So the film was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Original Screenplay, and it did win Best Original Screenplay. So let's talk about our film. I just want to go over the plot, go over the characters, because we will be diving deep in the analysis. So our film begins with Cassie, who's played by Carey Mulligan, and she is basically falling over, almost passing out at a bar, and a guy, played by Adam Brody, basically offers to take her home. On their way home, he changes his mind and decides to take her back to his apartment, where he starts hooking up with her despite her protests. Just when things are heating up, she sits up, completely sober, having it all been just a play and her faking it, and she asks, "What are you doing?" And our film begins. We get to learn a little bit more about Cassie. She lives with her parents, she works at a coffee shop, and at night, she goes to bars, and when men seem to prey on her because she's drunk or falling over and take her back to their place, she kind of, teaches them a lesson about doing that. Her life is kind of shaken up. Her normal little quiet routine is shaken up when an old classmate from med school comes into her coffee shop. His name is Ryan, and he's played by Bo Burnham. And Ryan asks her out. And despite a rocky start, they start dating. And when they're hanging out, Ryan mentions that an old med school classmate friend of theirs, Al Monroe, who's played by Chris Lowell, is back in town and he's getting married. This news really upsets Cassie, and she begins to concoct a plan. Now, part one of her plan, Cassie asks her old friend from med school, Madison, played by Allison Brie, to come out for lunch. They're talking, they're catching up, and she's getting Madison very, very drunk. And then she brings up the reason why she left med school. She alludes to the fact that a friend had come to Madison and said she was afraid that something bad happened to her. Madison is just exhausted by the topic. She's like, why are you bringing this up? It was so long ago. And then she starts to say things like, you can't sleep around and get drunk every weekend and then expect people to believe you when something bad happens. And we basically learn that Madison just judges this person. Like, she thinks they were crying wolf. She thinks that, you can't get drunk and put yourself in these bad situations and then, get upset when something happens. And Cassie is just like, you know what, I was hoping you would feel differently. And Cassie leaves a very drunk Madison alone at lunch. And as she's leaving, she tells an escort to take Madison to a hotel room. The next day, Madison calls her, freaking out because she can't remember what happened. And she kind of saw Cassie and the guy talking. She's like, the guy seems to know you. Like, did anything happen? Part two of the plan, Madison kidnaps Dean Walker's teenage daughter. And then she goes to the dean under an alias and questions, just talks to her about re-enrolling in med school. And she tells the dean the reason she dropped out is because her friend was assaulted, and she dropped out because her friend was assaulted. The dean really has not changed in her mentality. We learned that the friend was assaulted. The friend Nina was assaulted. She had bruises on her body. But despite this, the dean didn't think there was enough evidence. She didn't think that she should ruin a man's life over accusations like this, and that she gets 2 to 3 accusations a week, and it's just not fair to ruin the man's life from this. She also says that Nina should have been smarter. She should have not been in that situation. She should have done better. She should have been smarter to not put herself in a bad situation. Again, Cassie is pretty disappointed in the way that the dean thinks and feels. And she reveals that she has kidnapped the dean's daughter and brought her to the room and left her with the guys who currently live in the room where Nina was assaulted. The dean freaks out. She tries calling her daughter's phone, and Cassie pulls it out of her purse. So the dean knows that she has interacted with her daughter, and she's demanding to know where her daughter is. And Cassie just keeps saying she's in the room where Nina was assaulted. And eventually the dean just gives up and is like, you're right. And Cassie reveals that she didn't do this. She just left the daughter in a diner, tells the dean to call the diner and go pick her up. And she's like, I think you just had to see it. It hits different when it's somebody that you care about. Part 3. Cassie goes to see Jordan, who is a lawyer who defended Al Monroe in the sexual assault case. She's very surprised to see the man very disheveled. He reveals that he's on sabbatical because he had a psychotic episode. But he doesn't see it as a psychotic episode. He sees it as, finally contending with what he's been doing to women. He reveals that in his firm, he was paid a bonus if his team or any of the lawyers were able to pressure a girl to drop the case. They were paid another bonus if it was settled out of court. He was really monetarily incentivized to protect these men and pressure women in the situations. And all of that has finally caught up to him, and he has an immense amount of guilt over the situation. He's very remorseful, and he surprises Cassie by remembering Nina's name, and he can't sleep. He's in a terrible state. And he doesn't ask Cassie for forgiveness, but he says that he can't forgive himself. And Cassie forgives him, and she tells him to go to sleep. We see that Cassie had a plan to send a thug in to beat him up, but she calls it off after seeing Jordan's remorse. Cassie then goes to Nina's mom's house, and she just sits on the porch and reminisces about her, and her mom can just see that Cassie is stuck in the past in a way, and she's so caught up with vengeance that she's not able to move on. And so her mom says, please, just move on for everybody's sake. So after this, Cassie does take her advice. She lives her life. She starts to date Ryan more seriously. They have a wonderful relationship. She still works at the coffee shop and she enjoys her time there. And all of this is kind of interrupted when Madison shows up at her house. And Madison is just frantic. And she's like, I need to know if something happened with this guy. And at this point, Cassie is completely over the revenge. And she's like, I am sorry. I didn't tell you I'm sorry. I didn't call you back. Like, nothing happened. Please believe me. And Madison says, I have something to show you. And they go inside and Madison reveals that at the time that Nina was assaulted, someone took a video of it. So they videoed the assault and they also videoed all of the people who were around watching. And, Madison says that after this situation with the escort, she doesn't know it as an escort, but after the situation, it got her thinking about what happened to Nina, and she sees it differently now. And she is upset, and she tells Cassie, I remembered that there is this video and I wanted to give it to you. I don't recommend you watch it. It's horrible. But it's like sick because we all thought it was funny back then. And Cassie watches the video and it's absolutely horrific. And it breaks her heart even more when she sees that her boyfriend Ryan was in the room when Nina was assaulted, and he's one of the people who was witnessing it and standing around and laughing about it. This absolutely breaks her heart, and it completely revives her entire revenge plot. So Cassie blackmails Ryan into giving her the address of Al Monroe's bachelor party. She shows up as a stripper and drugs everybody before taking Al upstairs and handcuffing him to the bed. She tells him her name is Nina Fisher, and he says, you can't be Nina because Nina is dead. And he eventually finds out that Cassie is Nina's friend. And she tells him that, Nina was so engulfed by what happened to her and squeezed out until she wasn't there. And she wants Al to feel the pain that Nina felt. And so she threatens to carve Nina's name onto him. And while, she's attempting to do that, he breaks free and wrestles her and smothers her to death. The next morning, his friend Joe comes to the room and he still thinks it's a stripper. And he's like, you killed a stripper? And he keeps telling Al, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And they conspire to burn the body in the woods by the cabin. In the aftermath, we see the police, try and search along. We see the police talking to Cassie's parents, trying to find her. They go to Ryan and ask if he knows anything or knows where she might have gone. And he chooses not to mention the bachelor party. He corroborates a plan that she was going on a work trip. And at the wedding, at Al Monroe's wedding, Ryan gets a text saying, you thought this was over. And it's a scheduled message. Shout out Samsung. He gets a scheduled message saying, you thought this was over. And just then we hear the police arriving to arrest Al for the murder of Cassie. And we get a flashback seeing that Cassie had sent Jordan the video of Nina's assault and a note saying, hey, I'm going to go to this cabin on Friday. If anything happens for me, look for me in this area. This is where I would have been. So Jordan gets the ball rolling to basically get the police to search for Cassie in the area around the woods, and they find it, and they arrest Al Monroe for the murder of Cassie. And in one last scheduled message, she signs off, love, Cassie, and Nina. Okay, that was a lot. That's a very, very intense movie, and it doesn't feel intense at times because there's so many rom-com poppy moments and there's so much like bright, pretty colors. So when you boil it down to the plot, it's very intense. Today, I really want to talk about the ways that the film shows us that we have normalized violence against women. And it does this by flipping the role of the aggressor and the victim and showing us how uncomfortable we feel when the roles are reversed. But when it happens to women, it's just, we look the other way, or it's ignored, or it's just, dismissed very easily. And the film really makes us reflect on how we feel when this happens to others and realize that what is happening to the other people in the film is what has happened to the women. And this really makes us contend with the ways that this has been overlooked in society. Starting with just the phrase, a promising young man, like it's often used with men to excuse bad behavior. It excuses bad behavior by highlighting the potential that they have for the future. And By titling this A Promising Young Woman, Fennell is trying to get us to do the exact same for women. She's trying to both get us to excuse the bad behavior and also show us that this person has potential and it's worth overlooking the bad behavior to highlight the good potential that they have. And really get us to see that these futures are worth protecting just as much as men's. In the film, we're not used to seeing women behave this way. And it comes off as a horror in the film because we're so used to women being the person that is the victim, the final girl. We're not used to them being the aggressor. And that discomfort really touches on a point that we have a higher standard for women in society for women's behaviors in society than we do for men. We are much quicker to dismiss bad behavior in men, forgive them, overlook it. But for women, it's strange for them to behave this way. And it shows how, especially in situations of assault, women are very disproportionately burdened in them. Cassie is our vigilante, and the reason she's a vigilante is because she doesn't rely on the justice system. She can't rely on the justice system. And, throughout the film, we see situations and words and interactions that really drive home this point that the society in the film, which is very reflective of our own, is a society that has just enabled bad behaviors in men and excused it, all while putting this undue pressure on the women who are in these situations of being assaulted. We're going to break this analysis down into 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about the ways that the bad behavior is just normalized in men. Second, I want to talk about the systems that have just protected the men. Third, I want to talk about how the women are sort of held to a higher standard in behavior than men are. And lastly, I want to talk about the erasure of the victim. Let's dive into the first part and talk about the casting. So the guys who are kind of the perpetrators in the film are Adam Brody from the OC, Christopher Mintz-Plasse from Superbad. We have Chris Lowell. He plays in a few things. Life as We Know It, if you know that. Sam Richardson from Veep. And Bo Burnham, who is a very, famous comedian. He also plays a love interest in a few films. All of these guys are portrayed as a very nice guy. They often are cast in roles that are very sweet. They're the good guy, they're the nerd, or the endearing guy. They don't really fit into this stereotypical film, movie, jock, bad guy, get the girl kind of guy. And the casting was so intentional because I think that Fennell is trying to say that it's not a personality trait in these men. It's a behavior that they have learned to get away with. And it's a behavior that they have learned is normal or that they can do. And there's no repercussions for it. It's not, you're a bad guy, you're a jerk. It really is any guy. And a good guy could very easily be in this role. So the casting is very intentional. The second way that we see the way that men have been conditioned to not, feel responsible is through the script. When we first see Cassie passing out, it's Sam Richardson, Adam Brody, another guy talking at the bar, and they're watching her just be totally drunk at the bar. And one of the guys says, what do they say? Oh, she's asking for it, which is something that I think both men and women have absolutely thought before. You just see a person in a vulnerable position. You see them, their skirt hiked up or tiny outfits or whatever. And it's oh, she's asking for it. And it puts this burden on the victim. It says the victim almost deserves to be assaulted instead of putting the burden on the aggressor. And it's a very gross thing. And I think both men and women are completely guilty of saying that. Later when she goes home with Sam Richardson character, she doesn't really go all the way home with him. He gets smart to her plan. He recognizes her before and he's like, why do you guys have to ruin everything? And it's so funny of a line because I think that's how girls feel. Girls just like to go out and have fun. And it's guys that can make it very dark and sad and awful sometimes, not always. But, again, it shifts this burden back to the victim. We see that at the end when Al Monroe is unaliving Cassie. He says, this is your fault. And, in this situation, it was very intense. She was trying to cut him, and he smothers her to death. But it's very disproportional. It was like bringing a gun to a knife fight, and he just keeps smothering her, and he's saying, this is your fault. And the next morning when his friend Joe walks in, Max Greenfield. I forgot to say Max Greenfield from New Girl. Schmidt from New Girl is another guy who's very cute and sweet and endearing in New Girl, and he's a douchebag here. So she really, flips the script on the casting. But Max Greenfield's character is like, this is not your fault. Like, you did nothing wrong. And it's sad, but it's hilarious because he's on the bed saying this to Al while the dead body is right there. And it's like, this is clearly his fault. But like, they're using this language that was probably told to them again and again. This is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. This is not your fault. And it's so ingrained in them that they never, a lot of the men don't take the responsibility. You know, you hear them say things like, I was just a kid, or I'm a nice guy, or yeah, like things like that. And it's like things that they were probably told because they got absolved of responsibility at young age again and again and again, that is just ingrained in them. They can't be at fault. They can't be the perpetrator because at the core they're a nice guy. When in reality, these kinds of situations don't cross over into nice guy or bad guy. It is a bad act, and a nice guy can do a bad act and a bad guy can do a bad act, and it doesn't quite matter. But they just don't see themselves as responsible because they've been painted as someone who doesn't have to take the fault, someone who shouldn't take the fault, someone who's a nice guy, someone who's a good guy. And that's the danger in how these men have been conditioned to think that they are not at fault and their bad behavior isn't actually bad. The last way that we really get to see the way bad behavior is kind of normalized in men is sometimes the way that the men talk to each other. I mentioned that when Joe sees the body, he's like, this is not your fault. Like, you did nothing wrong. It's very weird. And when the police go to Ryan says nothing about knowing that Cassie went to the bachelor party. He completely hides it. He chooses to protect his friends. And the police also says to Ryan, he's like, her father seems to think that she's unwell. And that's a very I think that was just a misrepresentation of how the father felt. Like, the father was just starting to say something and the mom was like, no, she's okay. And it just kind of shows that men, this is not always, but in the film, it's like men talking to men. It's easy to point to the woman and be like, gosh, she's crazy. Like, this crazy girl, like, what is she up to? She's unwell. And it's almost like an affirmation of the behavior. The men are really, taught and conditioned to not take responsibility. And a really great example of this is when Ryan and Cassie and Gail, who is Cassie's coworker, played by Laverne Cox, great casting, they're all kind of just hanging out in the coffee shop. And Gail asks Ryan, she's like, have you ever killed anybody as a pediatric surgeon? And he's like, no, I have not. And then he admits that children have died on the operating table. And she's like, okay, then you have killed someone. And it is egregious to say that a doctor killed somebody who's on the operating table. Like, that is not the case always. There's so many things that happen. Like, it's an extreme example, but that whole interchange is put in the film to show us that that Ryan is part of this group of people and part of this group of boys who doesn't take responsibility, who doesn't see themselves as a perpetrator in a role or an aggressor in a role. They're just always in the good or always in the right. Before I go any further, I do want to shout out her parents in the film, which are Jennifer Coolidge and Clancy Brown. This was such a strange role for Jennifer Coolidge. I think I saw this before White Lotus. Anyway, whatever. Jennifer Coolidge has such a distinct look and role, and this felt like such a subversion for her, and I loved it. And at first, I didn't even recognize her in the role, but I really loved the father's role because the mom is the one who's always like, Cassie, you got to get out, you got to get your life, you got to do more, make friends, date, whatever. She has a very high standard for her daughter. And the father is the one who's very empathetic to the fact that she's going through something, and he's very understanding and affirming of her. And we needed that role like him because we needed a guy in the film that was on her side. We needed a good guy for her. And I think it's important to show that this is not all men. This is just this is just some men. It's not all men, because her father is just a very loving and endearing character to her. And also, I want to mention that Molly Shannon is cast as Nina's mom. And again, it was such a different role for Molly Shannon. She's SNL. She's usually does such comedic roles, but she's just a very heartbroken mom in this film, and it was very beautifully done on her part. And I think as a whole, Fennell just took these people who are really well known in different types of role and put them in this role and asked us to challenge our perceptions of stereotypes in film, but also our stereotypes of people. And it was just really, really brilliant on her part. let's talk about the systems that failed people. So we get three systems. We get the administrative system, we get the legal system, and we get the social system. Starting with Dean Walker, we really see the way that the administrative system failed because it was very hesitant to basically pursue charges against Al because he was such a good student. We see that he graduated magna cum laude. And the sad thing is that they both were at the top of their class. Like Nina was a top student, but I guess Al was as well. And they really chose the future of Al over the future of Nina, even though they both were top students. And they were so hesitant to ruin the future of Al, but it's a zero-sum game. So in choosing Al, they put this burden on Nina to just have to bear it, to have to live with it, to not pursue anything from it, despite the fact that there was so much evidence. She says, innocent until proven guilty, but Cassie brings up the fact that Nina had physical bruises, like handprints on her body, and there was a lot of evidence. And there's witnesses as well. They know that there's witnesses. And, the dean still doesn't think that's sufficient evidence to basically punish Al or do anything from him. And she really protects the future of this boy. Fortunately, it does come at the cost of protecting the future of the girl because it is asking her to just live with what has happened. The second system that we see is the legal system. The legal system really protects the boy, and that's not always the case in the real life, but in the film, it protects the boy. It pressures women to drop the case. It pressures, women to not, drop the case, settle out of court, whatever. And Nina would have gone through this hoping to get justice. If the administrative system failed, she probably was hoping to go through this to get justice in the justice system, and the legal system fails her as well. The last system is the social system, and that's kind of the most sad because we see that Nina had gone to her friend Madison and said, hey, I'm afraid something happened. And instead of taking it seriously, Madison dismissed it as crying wolf. She dismissed it as, you put yourself in this situation, or you should have been smarter, or whatever. And she doesn't have any empathy, and she doesn't take it seriously. And all of these people just kind of protect Al or choose Al over the situation. And it is he said, she said. And the core issue of he said, she said is that it's one or the other. And it's hard to believe both. And all of these people chose Al over Nina. And the very, very sad thing is, Madison, she understands. She judged Nina for not knowing better. She judged Nina for not doing better, for not understanding better, for not behaving better. She really thought Nina was asking for it in a way. And she really had no empathy for the situation until it was happening to her. And then when it was happening to her, she was like, okay, I get it. It actually is not that difficult to be in a situation where you were taken advantage of. It's not about ending up in a vulnerable situation. It's just in a situation where someone can really take advantage of you. And she saw that. And I think the most devastating part of her giving the video to Cassie is that, there's physical evidence. There's physical evidence that this happened. And if this physical evidence, it's heartbreaking that there was evidence, because this evidence could have been brought to the dean. It could have been brought to the lawyers. It could have been brought in court. And all of this would have given justice to Nina and corrected something that was wrong and protected people from someone like Al. That's the biggest thing. It's not about revenge. It's about protecting this person from other people in the future. And it's heartbreaking that this evidence had gone around. It was sent around to all the friends, and nobody spoke up. Nobody showed the video until years and years and years later when Madison showed it to Cassie. And it's very sad the depths at which people, the social society or the group of friends, really just rallied around Al. And worse, they thought it was funny. They thought her trauma and this horrible thing happening was just funny. And it really downplayed what she was going through, really downplayed the seriousness of the situation and how devastating it was, and how devastating the loss of innocence and safety and security was for Nina. But to me, the social situation was the absolute saddest, because it was probably the one that she was relying on most. And it was sad, the depth of the betrayal, the fact that there was videos, the fact that there was witnesses, and none of that came to light. Nobody came to light to show any of that to help Nina. So she was really not able to get the absolution that she needed. And like I was saying, it's not about punishing. Like, for Cassie, it's punishing and it's vengeance. But for Nina, it wasn't punishing and it wasn't vengeance. It was trying to protect society from people like Al, to protect people from having them do this again. And I mentioned that I'm a lawyer, and things I've talked about in past episodes is the purpose of the criminal system. There's rehabilitation, there's, recidivism, there's, retribution, there's trying to make the family whole. And this isn't trying to make she isn't pursuing legal action to make herself whole. She's trying to pursue it to stop him from doing something else in the future. And we see that it was a worthwhile effort of Nina to have gone through this, to pursue action against Al, because he is a dangerous person and he does kill Cassie in the end. It's so much worse to get sent away for murder than it is for rape. I think the sentence is obviously way more than that. But my point is, she wasn't wrong about the guy. It's not like it was a one-time thing. It's not like he was just a kid or he didn't know any better. This is years later. He's grown up. He's adult. He knows better. He's not in school. He's not even drunk. And he does this horrible thing of murdering. And so it just goes to show, the purpose wasn't to just get revenge on a guy and make him pay for something bad, which I think is what people say when these cases are pursued in court. Purpose is to stop it from happening again, to stop it from happening from this person, and to teach people, you cannot do this. This is extremely dangerous, and this is not behavior to be taken lightly or laughed at, especially in society. So the societal betrayal and the breakdown of the societal system that is meant to protect Nina is in a lot of ways the most devastating. And it's also the thing that I think really pushes Cassie to pursuing this ultimate revenge plan at the end, when she sees how far the depth of the betrayal went. The fact that there was a video, the fact that people had it and saw it, and worse, that the guy she is dating was there in the room when it happened. It's all too much, and it's enough to push Cassie over at the end. And it's enough to have devastated Nina. So we have discussed the ways that the men are just their bad behavior has been normalized. We went over the systems that have protected these men. I now want to switch over to the woman and talk about the ways that they are expected to behave better in society. Going back to the script, there's a few times that when Cassie's doing something, someone is like, "You're crazy." And she's like, "No." And sometimes she's like, "No." And sometimes she's like, "I really don't think I am." And I talked a lot about how it was jarring to see this role reversal. It was jarring to see the ways that Cassie is behaving this way. In reality, she is just mirroring what has happened to her, or what has happened to Nina. She's just mirroring the situation. And yes, she's very diabolical in how she concocts that. But yeah, she's mirroring the type of violence, the type of ignorance, the type of manipulation that is done to women. But it's just so unnerving to see it as a woman. So it not only shows the characters in the film that they all hold women to a higher standard, it's showing us as the viewers, hey, if you're unnerved, if you're thinking this is a thriller, then you have this mentality of women that they have to behave better, that they have to behave a certain way, and you're holding them to a higher standard and a different standard than you probably hold men. We see this also with a lot of Christian motifs in the film. When we're introduced to Cassie, she's kind of suspended on this high bench, and her arms are out to the side in the crucifix position. And it kind of signalizes to us that she's going to sacrifice herself for the justice or the sake of this plan or her vengeance. And when she's being hooked up at the bed with Adam Brody's character at the very start of the film, she's in that same position. She dies in that position. And the next morning, when it just cuts to morning and the sunlight is streaming through the window onto her body. And we get, when Jordan, the lawyer, is just crying to her and saying he can't forgive himself. He's crying on her lap, and she just puts her hand on his head and says, "I forgive you, go to sleep." And there are several times that her bed and the couch have this, double hump kind of shape to it. And she's always framed in the middle as if these are angel wings. And, all of these are meant to show, on one hand, that we have this subconscious idea of women, that they need to behave better, that they need to act better, that they need to do better. And on the other hand, she's also painted as a godlike figure who is out there doling justice because she has the power to. She can, but she has no other means and no other avenue of justice to rely on. So she's the one who has to enact this plan. Lastly, I want to talk about the filmmaking techniques that Fennell uses that I think really drives home this point. I am probably giving Emerald Fennell too much credit here, but I think it works. So a lot of the film is very beautiful pastel colors. Her fingernails are always painted like pink, blue, green, yellow, peach, and those exact colors show up in so many shots in her house, in her bedroom, in her clothing, in her hair, in the coffee shop. Like they're always just coming up again and again. And this is intercut with a lot of scenes when she's enacting vengeance, which are darker. They're darker tones. It's very much like regular world kind of stuff. There's red in every scene that she's enacting vengeance. It's often framed around her or behind her when she's doling out vengeance. And it's a very jarring thing. Like, it's almost like a rom-com smashed with a horror. We get this like really cutesy girly world, and then all of a sudden it's like a horror. And the horror elements come from seeing this real world, normal colors. She's dressed a lot more maturely. She's dressed more like appropriate for her age. She's not wearing these cutesy bows and braids and things like that. And it's jarring because I think subconsciously it's weird for us to see a woman be both. It's weird for us to see her be dressed like a child, and she doesn't act like a child. Like, it's funny because she dresses like a child, and I truly believe that she's hiding in childhood. Like, to me, the childhood clothes are the costume, and she's like hiding in the past and hiding in childhood. But it's jarring to see her dress in this way, and I appreciate the fact that she never drops her voice. Her voice is always the same, and she plays Daisy in Great Gatsby. So that she can do a cutesy, girly, high-pitched voice, and her voice is just always normal, low, raspy, no matter if she's dressed in a cutesy way or not. But the dichotomy is kind of unjarring, and that's what creates like a horror thriller element to the film. And I think this is supposed to be representative of the way that we expect women to behave, or the way that the film is expecting women to behave. So let me explain further. There's so many things that were said to Nina, like she should have known better. She should have done better. She should have been smarter. She shouldn't have put herself in this situation. There's this expectation that this young woman should have acted more maturely, should have been completely in control of the situation and be able to control everybody around her so something like this doesn't happen to her. That is what we get in Cassie. We get this young woman who is controlling the situation, who is controlling everything around her to ensure this does not happen to her or to any other women. And it unnerves us. And I think that like the point of this, and again, I might be projecting a lot. I'm probably just saying what I would do as a filmmaker, but I really think that the reason we get such a flip-flop in the tone of this film is because it's making us subconsciously contend with how comfortable it is. And it's making us contend with what we think of women and how it doesn't make sense. Like, Cassie doesn't make sense as a character. Like, how can she be a girl who wears pink and yellow and has braids and bows in her hair? And then how can she be a girl who puts on makeup and lures men? I mean, she doesn't lure them. She never lures them. They take advantage of her. But how can she be both these things? And I think that's the question we're meant to ask, because that is what the film is saying Nina is. They're saying that she has to be this. She has to be this girl, despite who she is as a young girl, as a young med student. She also has to be this smart, put-together woman who's in control of the situation. And I think Fennell is saying, look at what you are asking women to be. Does that make sense to you? And it doesn't. And that's what creates the thriller element of the film. And I don't know if this is intentional or not. Like, I'm probably reading a lot into it. I'm probably just saying, like, this is what I think she did. But it works. I really think it works. Like, I think it works to, like, show us how absurd it is that we expect women. And I keep saying women, and it's like young women and woman and girl. But the truth is, like, there's so much girliness that transcends into adulthood. So, like, it's not like when you turn 18, or it's not like a 24, 25-year-old med student doesn't still care about bows and braids and cutesy and wearing pink. Like, clearly I'm wearing pink right now. So, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, this, it's expecting women to kind of engulf this whole spectrum of power and control while still being who they are, and it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the film in the sense that that's what creates the thriller element. And she's really showing us, well, this is what you want women to be, but you're uncomfortable with that. So why are you asking that of women? Why are you expecting women to be like this if it actually makes you nervous when you see this on screen? I think it was brilliantly done. I don't know if that was her intention. If it was, good job. If it was not, good job. It pulled off in the film. The very last thing that I want to talk about is the silence of the victim. Nina is not in the film. We don't hear her. We don't see her. She only lives through Cassie. She only lives through what Cassie does, her memory of her missing her and loving her. And this is really emblematic of the fact that so many women who have had violence put against them are silenced, are disappeared, are unalived, are unable to speak, are just suffering in silence. And we see that. And it's beautiful that Cassie keeps up Nina's story and makes Nina so alive in the film. But that's not always the case. And I think, it really is a testament to like their relationship and the effect that she had on Cassie, that Cassie is so profoundly affected by what happened to Nina. And, at no point does Cassie get upset at Nina. At no point does she question why Nina died by suicide. And it's sad for Cassie that she feels alone in this grief. There's nobody who understands it. And even the person that she expects to be on her side is Nina's mom. And even Nina's mom wants her to move on. And that's why she's so jarred when Jordan remembers Nina's name, because nobody even says Nina's name. Nobody remembers it. Nobody says it. And it just all speaks to the erasure of the victim and the fact that like these men whose futures we protect, they go on to live these big lives. They go on to be okay. And the victim is the one who is totally forgotten and erased. And it really speaks to something that does happen very much in real life. And, at no point does Cassie get angry at Nina. She doesn't question why Nina did what she did. She doesn't get angry at her for dying by suicide. It's like she completely gets it. And there's a sad line when she confronts Ryan and blackmails him. And Ryan is like, great, but we both won't be doctors. And at no point does Cassie ever get mad at Nina for having to drop out of med school to take care of her. Like there is no part of her that is angry at Nina or holds it against Nina. And I think that's just a beautiful love. But it's also a testament to her understanding how difficult this was for Nina. As we go through this revenge plot, by the end, we're exhausted. Like we're exhausted and overwhelmed by this revenge plot. But this exhaustion and the overwhelming of the exhaustion of the revenge plot is meant to mirror the way that Nina felt. Like we have just walked through every single system that has failed Nina. And so the fact that it is overwhelming, the fact that there is so much buildup, like this is all supposed to be a mirror of how Nina felt. And we get the parallel, like Cassie's story is entirely parallel to Nina's. She's consumed by this. She's unable to move on despite the fact that people tell her to. Even when she does, she's drawn back by it. She is hurt by it. She's stagnated by it. She's stuck by it. And it engulfs her in the same way it engulfed Nina. And so even her death is mirrored to like the assault. It happens on a bed. They don't cut away. They don't keep the camera on her struggling, but they don't cut. It goes for the whole 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And, immediately after, Joe's like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Like, we'll take care of it. And like, you can just imagine this is all the stuff that was said when it happened. Like, it's such a parallel story. And I think it's beautiful, but it goes to show that like what happens to these women stay with these women. Like it doesn't, it's easy to erase the woman. It's easy to erase the story, but it's not erased for them. It's not gone for them. It's very much alive for them. It's very much pain for them. And, I think the fact that this is all about Nina and she's not in the story is so important because the victim is often erased. The victim is silenced. The victim is unalived. The victim is, unable to escape the situations. And it's not talked about a lot, but like this is actually like a very, very serious component to abuse and to assault. It's the fact that people don't feel the ability to like step up or say anything at all. I think one of the saddest lines in the film to me, I cannot begin to tell you how much I've thought about this. And it's such a sad line because for Cassie and for Nina, this has engulfed their life. It has engulfed, for Nina, it's engulfed like every second until it squeezed her out, as Cassie says. And for Cassie, like it has completely engulfed her life as well. And she's just showing a glimpse of this pain. She's just showing a glimpse of this anger. She's just doling out a fraction of this justice. Like she doesn't actually hurt Madison. She doesn't actually hurt Dean Walker's daughter. She doesn't actually hurt Jordan. And none of these people can take it. And it was only a fraction of what was done to Nina, and they can't handle it. And it was such a sad line because this woman has been sitting with this pain for so long and for years, and it has just completely consumed her. And I think the fact that Cassie fights so hard for Nina and fights so hard to have vengeance and to fix it and to make the world right is because she's promising the viewer, she's promising everybody that Nina was a person whose future was worth fighting for. Nina was a promising young woman who deserved to have her future protected just as much as the guys. And it's just a very beautiful story. Okay, let's wrap this up with some last thoughts. So the name Cassie, a few times she is called Cassandra. I can't remember who calls her Cassandra, but I do think that's a nod to Greek mythology. Greek Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, but cursed that not everyone would believe her. And that happens. Like she like they say, Al Monroe is he assaulted her and nobody believes her. And then we do find out in the end he does. So like, I do think it is a nod towards the Greek mythology, Cassandra. I also want to say that you can really tell, like, her plans are so diabolical, so intricately concocted, so perfectly tailored that you can really see how intelligent Cassie is. And you're like, yeah, she could have been in med school. Like, she's got the high level thinking, the complex thinking, the ability to like think through complex ideas very well, that you really see that this character could have very easily been in med school. There is also a lot of speculation that the promising young woman comes from the Brock Turner case. If you don't remember, so in 2015, there was a young man, Brock Turner, I think his name, Turner is his name. He sexually assaulted a woman when she was unconscious. He was caught in the act. She brought charges against him. He was given a very light sentence of about 6 months and was let out after 3 months on good behavior. And the media just kept calling him a promising young man. And that just created a lot of like backlash and a lot of like criticism because he obviously did this horrible act. And the story, there's a lot of speculation that the promising young man comes from this case and that Fennell switched it to be the promising young woman. There's obviously a lot to like. There's obviously a lot. It's a very complex case. It's a very complex situation. The girl, Chanel Miller, actually wrote a book about it called Know My Name, and she actually came out with a children's book this year. So if you want to learn more about it, I do recommend reading her book or just supporting her and reading her children's book. But Emerald Fennell said that she wasn't thinking of this case. It was just more in the fact that, like, when you say a promising young man, you're often excusing the bad behavior in a man. And the only time you ever really see a promising young woman is when she's gone and passed away and her future is like cut short. So she wanted to really take this idea that it's not really used for women and make that the title. I also want to talk about the Dominic Pellico case that happened in France in 2024. This is something that I have talked about, that came up in my French lessons. And if you don't know the case, this man, Dominic Pellico, was basically drugging his wife and facilitating sexual assault on her repeatedly for 9 years. And it all came to light in like 2020, and the case happened in 2024. And the reason I was thinking about this is because it was a very like horrific, sad thing to have happened. They were married for 50 years and he was drugging her for 9 and, letting people assault her. And She chose and really fought for having the case be public because she didn't want to be ashamed as a victim. She wanted the shame to lie with the perpetrators and the aggressors because that's where the shame belonged. And a lot in this essay, I've talked about how the burden is placed on the victim, and all of these systems that I talked about, the legal, the administrative, the social system, the fact that men don't see themselves as the perpetrator, the fact that women are held to this higher standard, the fact that women are silenced, all of that just puts this burden on the person who is assaulted into thinking, into carrying that burden, into carrying both the burden of what happened and also the burden of there's nothing that I can do about this, nothing I can do to make it right. And I really like this case. I like what Giselle Pellico has done because she's become a face of feminism because she's really tried to shift the burden to the aggressor. And I think that's incredibly important. And it's something you don't see in the film, but I really am glad that we get to see it in real life, that this stuff is happening and it's important to talk about. And that is all I have for this essay. I do want to say that I should have said this at the beginning. I very much want to acknowledge that assault happens against men. Assault happens against men, from women, from men. It is not talked about enough. There's also a lot of, lack of resources for men in the situation. I didn't talk about any of this because that's just not the purview of this film. We're strictly kind of just talking about violence on women against men and in social settings. I'm not talking about domestic abuse. That's a whole separate topic, but this is a very wide and varied topic. I think, there's so much to be said. There's so much to learn, and I'm grateful that I'm learning it. I'm grateful that I get to learn it in a different language because reading things in a different language really just kind of opens your minds to different ways of thinking and the way different people see the world. So I'm grateful that I've got to do a lot of reading of this in a different language, but I'm going to include some resources because I think that, if anybody needs support out there, if anybody needs guidance, I really want to be an advocate for people learning more about this topic. And I want to be an advocate to help people get the help that they need, should they need it. So I'm going to link some resources. And I think this is a very varied topic. And I think I'll probably be covering films that touch on other aspects like domestic or assault on men. And this was just a very, very narrow issue within this larger topic, but I'll definitely be talking about it more. But that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was a lot of fun. I hope to catch you in my next essay. Not sure what it's going to be. You're going to find out. Every time I do a heavy essay, I think I have to do something a lot lighter after. And then the second I do something lighter, I'm like, I got to do something heavy again. So not sure what it's going to be. Probably something fun, but we'll see. But it was great hanging out with you, and I will see you all next time. I had every plan to dress in more casual, comfy setting, and then I found this dress at the back of my closet, and I was sweating in this apartment because, like I said, the radiators can make things extremely hot. So I was sweating, and I saw the dress, and I was like, I got to put it on. So yeah, good times all around.